Chapter 56 Float. Summary. Remember that new quirk Izuku got? Ochako stretched out her limbs as the soft glow of the day cycle filled the ship. Sounds of blankets rustling could be heard from the others, but she focused on working out all the stiff muscles. She pulled one arm across her body and then the next, relishing in the slow stretch settling into her bones. Her back made a satisfying pop as she leaned back, face upturned to the ceiling and... Why was Deku on the ceiling? Ochako ran her fingers together, noting that her gloves were still in place. Still, the image of Deku resting peacefully on the ceiling did not go away. "What you looking at?" Denki quietly questioned, not wanting to wake the more sleepy members of their family. He was sat on one of the counters surrounding the nest, legs swinging animatedly over the blanket soup. Ochako didn't respond, instead, just pointing up with a gloved finger. She knew that he had seen the ceiling broccoli when his legs abruptly stopped their movement. Denki trailed, clearly unsure how to respond to this situation. Katsuki grunted at the two of them from the edge of the nest, though Ochako knew he resolutely refused to call it that. "What the fuck are you two yapping about so early?" "Izuku's on the ceiling," Denki said, a hint of bafflement in his voice. "And it's not my quirk," Ochako added quietly. The three morning people of the group looked up to stare at the ceiling. Deku was curled into a little ball, pillow death-gripped in his arms. Now that Ochako looked closer, he wasn't sleeping as peacefully as she first thought. He seemed to be shivering slightly, and there was a little crease between his eyebrows. They continued staring, unsure of what exactly was going on, when Deku's eyes shot open. His pupils were pinpricks and the terror in his expression was clear. But despite his wide eyes, Ochako knew he wasn't quite seeing what was in front of him. He was in the throes of an anxiety attack. A bad one. His arms scrambled for purchase, but after finding nothing but smooth metal and empty air, he curled protectively in on himself. Sounds of now gasping breaths filled the room, and the others began to stir. This was not good. She needed to help him before the others woke up and added to the chaos. Moving on instinct, she yanked off her gloves and pressed all 10 padded fingers against one another. The familiar feeling of weightlessness came over her, and she knew what to do. Kicking gently off the floor, she floated up to Deku's side, careful not to land right on top of him. Now that she was closer, she could see the cold sweat sticking his hair to his forehead. His eyes were still unresponsive, so she called out to him in a voice she hoped was calm and soothing, despite her own panic. "Deku, it's okay. I'm here. You're safe on the ship. Remember?" His head turned slightly towards her, but he was making himself as small as possible. It hurt her heart to see. "The one you helped repair with Mei and Denki? Mei said you came up with a name for it. I think Kiro is very fitting." His breath had turned less frantic, and the misty sheen from his eyes seemed to have dissipated slightly. Ochako?" he gasped out, voice still gravelly from sleep. Yes, it's me, Deku. Everything is okay. Can I touch you?" The green-haired boy let out a silent nod, so Ochako maneuvered herself upside down to face him, hands slipping comfortably into his, pinky fingers raised as always. It was definitely weird to be sitting on the ceiling, but right now, she needed to help Izuku get back to the present. "Deku, can you name 5 things you see right now? For me, please?" He was silent for a moment, before his quiet voice sounded in the stillness. I can see you. I can see the floor." His gaze wandered up towards what was actually the floor. "I mean the ceiling? I can see the nest and the control panels, and I can see Ayalan's plant. He let out a shaky breath. Good, good. 4 things you can feel? Your hands, the ceiling, the pillow, and the cold. I'm really cold. Ochako just moved closer, pressing her body against his in a half hug. Okay, you're doing great. Now, 3 things you can hear? Breathing, the air cycling, and the engine rumbling. Almost there, she praised. Can you tell me 2 things you can smell? Last night's dinner, and... He nuzzled into the crook of her shoulders. Strawberries? Okay. She chuckled slightly. One last one. What's 1 thing you can taste? My mouth, which tastes bad. I think I need to brush my teeth. He was back. Ochako couldn't help but grin widely. They were definitely getting better at calming each other down since shitty circle therapy started, though she would have to thank Mr. Aizawa for the whole countdown thing when they got back to Earth. After she had an anxiety attack one night, he'd helped her calm down with it and taught it to her, which had really paid off. You can brush your teeth as soon as we figure out how to get you down. Izuku looked at the nest, where everyone was now awake and staring at them. I was gonna ask about that. Why am I on the ceiling? You tell us, shitty Deku, Katsuki tutted. We woke up and you were stuck to the ceiling, but Cheeks still had her gloves on. Izuku scrunched his eyebrows in, a finger coming up to tap his lip, before he seemed to remember something. Slipping into basic, he began to ramble out an explanation. Oh, I think this is the 7th user's quirk, Float. I talked to the other ghosts again, and she said I had unlocked it when the town was being attacked, even though I didn't really notice. I think she said something about waking up on the ceiling, so that's probably what this is. You have another quirk already? Denki questioned. That's so cool! Katsuki cuffed him on the back of the head. Except Deku is stuck to the ceiling like a dollar store helium balloon. Well, Ochako started, before you woke up, it seemed like you were having a nightmare. A lot of quirks activate on their own when you're emotional, so now that you're doing better, it shouldn't be too hard to figure out how to turn it off, right? That sounds like the kind of thing you might say. You're right. I just need to figure out how to deactivate it. I can do that. I figured out how to use Black Whip, and One for All. I can do this. He muttered the last part seemingly to himself. Deku took some deep breaths and closed his eyes. For a minute, it seemed as though nothing would happen, but then he began to slowly lower to the ground, before opening his eyes a crack and proceeding to plummet into the nest, thankfully not on top of anyone. Ochako giggled as she floated gently to the floor before deactivating her quirk. I'm sure you'll get the hang of it, Deku. It seemed similar to my quirk in a way, so I'm sure I can give you some tips. Thanks, he said, voice muffled from where he lay face down in the blankets. After the floating incident that morning, they used the rest of the day to get used to the ship. Katsuki prepared them all a nice breakfast in the kitchen, already having taken it over as his domain. With taking care of themselves accounted for, they needed to figure out something to occupy themselves with. Being confined to a metal box in the void with nothing to do but wait for their space road trip to be over was a big departure from working their butts off every day to leave the planet. After sitting around, staring at the tapestry of stars from out the window for a few hours, it was amazing, but you could only stare at something for so long before getting bored. Everyone separated to find something to do. Ochako, predictably, gravitated towards the nav station, and Katsuki plopped down at weapons. Turns out, spaceships are pretty complicated, so they were engaged for the whole day, learning how to work the different systems. Denki and Izuku practiced flying, but there wasn't much to learn out in empty space, so they just chatted and paced around the ship. May busied herself with making sure the ship was ship-shape and playing with the less violent Roombas. Mina and the Osiers got bored and worked on some new clothing designs. Things were going pretty well for their second day. Everyone was beginning to get a little more comfortable on the ship. But the thing about weapon-wielding Roombas puttering around the small ship, and a Greenette with a brand new quirk, was there was bound to be some incidents.